Lex Rofberg.
This is Lex Rofberg.
This is our first Judaism Unbound live on video recording where we are sort of combining, we're bringing two worlds together, the Judaism Unbound podcast and the Jewish Live, whatever that is, live TV service. And we are doing essentially what is an episode of Judaism Unbound before a live studio audience, which we have never really done before. We've done versions of it where we've had some kind of panel discussion that ended up on the podcast, but we've never actually done an interview of one person that's going to end up as a podcast episode in front of a live studio audience. So that's what we're doing here. And anybody that's here watching, we welcome you. And I just want to say that you are going to see a little bit of how the sausage is made with the Judaism Unbound podcast if you're interested. So we're going to have some starts and stops. We're going to say, hey, could you say that again, where your audio was a little fuzzy or whatever. And that's how you'll see that the podcast is actually made. I should say one other thing about the way the Judaism Unbound podcast is made is that we record our official introductions on in post-production. So you're not going to necessarily get the whole full-on introduction of our guest today, but you'll get a little bit of a brief version of that just so that folks watching will know. And then we will have actually done proper research and we'll do that right in post-production. So without further explanation, let's just jump right into it. And I'm going to introduce our guest, that because we are sort of in this leading up to Passover season, and in particular, people are expressing a lot of anxiety about this Passover. How am I going to do my Seder this year? And it's so different. And we had an opportunity to interview our guest today, and actually a number of guests I'll talk about in a moment. But our guest today, Ellen Bernstein, who is the author of a new Haggadah called The Promise of the Land, which is a Haggadah that is focused on the earth, on ecology, and we'll get into much more about what it's all about in your language, Ellen. But we are going to speak with Ellen Bernstein. I should say she is the founder of Shomrei Adama, which is the first Jewish environmental organization, and the author of many books on Judaism, the ecology, and the Bible. And so we're able to talk here not only about Passover and about the Haggadah and about ecology, but about putting all that together. And I think, Ellen, there's a way in which we can be thinking about us living through something sort of like a mythical time. We talked a little bit recently with B'nai Lappi about the idea that maybe there are certain traditions like Shabbat, which are weekly, certain traditions like Passover, which we do annually. And maybe there's a certain kind of tradition that we do every 2,000 years or so, where we have to reimagine Judaism in a bigger way somehow. And maybe we don't always realize that we're in a time like that, but now there are ways in which we feel like maybe we're in a bit of a time like that. So I should note also that later on in our episode today, we are going to be joined by Galia Goodman, who is the illustrator of this Haggadah. And later in the conversation, we are going to be joined by Lauren Goldberg, who's the executive director of Ithaca College Hillel, and Tali Abraham, who's a student leader at Ithaca College Hillel. And they were, I think, planning to do a Haggadah, planning to do a Seder based on this Haggadah, and then the coronavirus situation emerged. So now they're still planning to do a Seder based on this Haggadah, but obviously in a way that would seem a little bit strange when we're doing it around an ecology earth-based Haggadah. But it's going to be fascinating to talk about both with you, Ellen, and also with them, what that might look like, because I think that we're hoping that this conversation is going to be not just interesting, but useful for people who are out there having a lot of anxiety about what should our Passover look like this year. So let me stop there and welcome you, Ellen Bernstein, to Judaism Unbound. It's great to have you, and welcome.
Thanks. It's great to be here. I'm really excited to see what unfolds. This does feel like a new adventure. So, and thank
We
you.
are too.
Yeah.
We are too. So thank you so much. So let's just jump right in. If you could tell us a little bit about the story of this Haggadah. How did you come to create it? Why? And what is it exactly? How is this Haggadah different from all other Haggadahs, as it would be a cliche, but I think that's a good question.
Sometimes cliches work. So I founded the first Jewish environmental organization, Shomrei Adama, 32 years ago. And in the beginning, a lot of what we did was we're looking all over for in the Bible and Jewish texts for ecological kind of nuggets, right? We're sort of after a while, it really felt like what we were doing was cherry picking, which is kind of what people are always doing when they're trying to build a case for something with a biblical background. And we compiled lots of materials, wrote various books, and developed an ecological way of looking at the Bible and Jewish texts. But for me, after a while, it started feeling like it wasn't enough. And I really felt like if there weren't a through line through the Bible that felt ecological to me, I basically felt like I was kind of done with this project. So, and I will make the connection, we'll get to what this has to do with the Haggadah, but I have to give you some of the biblical background first. So that was like the very early days of Shomrei Adamah. And so this other piece of this is that I was trained in college in ecology. And if you're an environmental studies program, one of the people that you study is a man named Aldo Leopold. And Aldo Leopold is considered one of the first eco-philosophers. And basically, he said, and he was writing in the 40s or the 50s, and he said that the reason that we have an environmental crisis is because we don't have a land ethic. He said we have an ethic for how to relate to each other and how to relate to God and how to relate in community, but we don't have an ethic for how to relate to the land. And the way that he defined land, well, basically what he did was he expanded the definition of community to include land. So land for him was a living organism, like the way we understand an ecosystem today, but that the land is really alive, it's generative, it's made up of water, soil, air, microorganisms, plants, animals, and us. So just thinking about land in a three-dimensional way instead of a two-dimensional way, which is really how most of us think about it most of the time. And so I was thinking about this and wondering maybe what I needed to do was apply his thinking about land to the Bible. Maybe that would be a clue. And so I did a word search and saw that the word eretz occurs like over 2,000 times in the Bible. And then I felt like, oh, well, I'm really onto something here. This is significant. 2,000 times is
because eretz means land. Just clarify that.
Land, yeah. Yes, definitely. Eretz means both land and earth. So I just started thinking about this and started looking at and teaching. I did a session, a course at the Jewish community in Amherst, and we spent a year just looking at all the occurrences of eretz and just really thinking about it from an ecological perspective as opposed to a territorial perspective, right? Like thinking of eretz is an ecological system as opposed to being flat and inert and just stuff, right? So anyway, it's just like the whole Torah came alive in a very different way when we were looking at it that way. So that I spent a few years doing this. I wrote an article, a scholarly article, and then a little bit after that, Berman House, the press, came to me and asked me if I'd write a Haggadah from an ecological perspective. And my initial reaction before thinking about all the land stuff was, the Haggadah is a story about Jewish peoplehood. It's about freedom of people. How could I connect that to the land, right? So I sat with it for a while because that was what the challenge was going to be. Like, how do you connect freedom to the earth? And for me, I needed, if I were going to write an ecologically focused Haggadah, I needed the ideas to emerge out of the Haggadah itself. I didn't want to, just make this themed Haggadah that was something that I dreamed up. So then I remembered after all this study that the Mishnah, right, and you were talking about this yesterday, that the Mishnah talks about what you do for Passover, right? You drink 4 cups of wine, you say a few blessings, and you're supposed to tell, and you do the the three foods, the Gamliel foods, right? You talk about them, and then you're supposed to
Passover, the Passover sacrifice, the matzah, and the bitter herb.
Yes, right. Those three. And then the only other thing is you're supposed to tell the story of going from deprivation to liberation. And the way you're supposed to do that is by reading this passage, my father, that begins with the words, my father was a wandering Aramaean. Okay. But one thing that's really interesting is that it says in the Mishnah that you're supposed to read the entire passage. So when the Haggadah was first written down, the entire passage was never written down. So the rabbis dropped the last two lines, right? So we should talk about the passage, what the passage says, right? So these should be familiar to lots of people, not everyone for sure. And also, I should just also say, and you also talked about this yesterday, was that the way these lines generally appear in a Haggadah is that they're all intertwined with this midrash, which is extremely difficult and very off-putting to a lot of people. And so if you a lot of people will never have even seen this because people just omit it all the time. So the passage,
or they don't realize it's a single passage. They don't put the main lines from the Bible together and recognize it as a section of the Bible.
That's right. Yeah. So the passage basically goes something like, my father was a wandering Aramaean. We went down to Egypt. We were oppressed. We were miserable there. We were treated terribly. We cried out to God, and God saved us. And that's basically, those are the first four lines of the passage. And then there are two other lines, and the two other lines got cut from this section. And the two lines are, and God brought us to a land, and we brought back the first fruits of that land to God. So it was just very interesting to me because I'd seen over and over that lines that have to do with land had gotten cut out of our prayers. And here was another one. And so I just started realizing when I was thinking about it, it's kind of like, we were miserable. We cried out to God. God took us out of Egypt. God freed us, right? God took us out of Egypt. God freed us. But what did God free us for, right? God freed us to give us a land so that we would bring back the first fruits of that land to God. And to me, that's about a system of reciprocity. It's a system of living in ongoing relationship with God and the land, the earth, where we're living in the cycle all the time. And so that was how the sort of the nugget by which I could connect freedom to the earth. So, and again, just as Lex was saying before, Eretz means both land and earth. So that's always gone on there. So once I was able to do that, once I saw this land connection in the most central portion of the Haggadah, then it was relatively easy to go through the other 14 steps and make a connection. So that's, yeah.
Well, so can we dig a little into that? So I guess I would float my theory, and I think I read this somewhere else about why those lines were cut off. Was because the whole passage from Deuteronomy was originally what was said at the bringing of the first fruits offerings on the holiday of Shavuot, and it sort of feels like they probably were saying, well, look, can we preserve some of this because we're not in the land anymore and we don't have first fruits offerings, but we still kind of like this poem. So let's keep the first four lines, and the other two, I guess we can't really say anymore. It makes us sad to say them. So let's kind of, stop saying them, and we'll move the whole thing to Passover. And the question is, okay, so how do you resolve that now, right? How do we think about bringing those back into it?
We can talk about what I did in the Haggadah.
Sure.
shall I show that section? Is that a good thing to do now, or do you just want me to talk about it? You tell me how to handle this.
I think maybe for now, just talk about it, like just, because this part, and when Galia comes on later, maybe we can sort of talk about it again. You can describe a little bit of the...
Yeah, no, I'm going to read a little bit if that's okay. Hang on.
Okay, sure.
Second. Okay, so basically what I do is, as you were just mentioning before, in the traditional Haggadah, what happens is a lot of times people don't even see the biblical passage because it's all wrapped up in this midrash. What I've done is I've restored the biblical passage to its biblical context. So basically I have each line of that Deuteronomy passage, and then I give the context and tell the story that goes along with that. So it's totally from the Bible. So then so I restored 2 lines. So one of them is, Adonai brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So I'm just going to read you some of my drash on this. Getting out of Egypt was not the hardest part. We'd spend 40 years wandering in the wilderness before we could receive a land where we could set roots, grow our own food, and finally be free. It would take all that time to heal from the condition of slavery that we inherited in Egypt. In Egypt, Pharaoh owned and exploited the land and everything in it: the fruit trees, the animals, the gold deposits, and us. In Pharaoh's ownership economy, people and creatures were commodities to be bought and sold. If we were going to inherit a land, we'd need to honor the dignity of all people, all creatures, and the land. God freed the Israelites not just for our sake, but for the sake of the entire creation. The land and its creatures belong to God. Just want to read one more section here. We could not own the land because land has a life of its own. We were to treat the land as a commons which everyone could share and enjoy together, just as we all share the land. We were to see ourselves as God's tenants, guests on the land. Actually, if you don't mind, can I do one more? The hardest lesson for us to learn was that the land could not be guaranteed. If we neglected the land's need for rest every 7th year, if we forgot the Sabbath, if we avoided giving to the poor or hoarded the land or its produce, our behaviors would reverberate in the land. And one day the land might be unable to endure our indifference any longer. The land may have no recourse but to spew us out. If we wanted to dwell freely in the land for generation, we would have to learn what farmers have always known: that caring for land is a matter of life and death. It requires dedication, perseverance, and love.
Cool. Really cool. Thank you. So anybody who listens to Judaism Unbound, our podcast regularly, and this is, straddling the universes of Jewish Live and Judaism Unbound today, this recording that we have, they'll tell you that Lex loves to ask about titles and names of things. This is a thing I love to do. I am really struck by the phrasing promise of the land. I am really interested in that, and I want to hone in on a couple of things. So first off, the phrase we all have heard lots and lots and lots is the promised land. We hear that, and I've been reflecting since I saw that title, and especially hearing you talk just now about how historically in Jewish thought, and it's maybe even more today with the state of Israel being like an actual state, the difference between land and the land in Judaism is massive, and in Hebrew, aretz and haaretz, or eretz and haaretz. Like it would, because some people might be listening so far and be like, wait a second. You're saying that there's this gap where we haven't had this relationship in a deep way to land, but like Israel is this huge deal. And the whole story is a journey from one land, a narrow land, Mitzrayim, Egypt, to a new land. But I think you're totally right, because what we miss, and I think there's something very deep here, what we miss when we hone in on a particular, I don't know, landmass, body of land, like area of
Territory.
land.
Yeah.
Yeah, territory. Thank you. When we focus on the holiness of that particular land, almost by definition, we're not talking about the holiness of land, period. To go back to what you were talking about with Leopold, like the idea that land of everywhere is sacred and alive. And so I think that there might be a real gap in Jewish thought and history, precisely because of the importance we've given to haaretz, to the, like capital T, the land, Israel, that sort of, I don't know, it takes up the bandwidth, the space that we would be talking about land generally, and it hones it in on one land. So I guess I'm curious to hear from you about that phrasing, promise of the land. Generally, of land is how I hear that from you. I don't hear it only as talking about Israel, and how that played into your Haggadah construction.
Yes. Well, this is exactly one of the things that I was hoping we'd talk about. And also it plays into the language conversation we were having earlier. So yes, I mean, the promise of the land is a play on the promised land. It's not the promised land. It's about what land promises us. It's all the gifts that land promises us. The gift of life, the gift of food, right? The gift of shelter. Land gives us everything. So, but the promised, this was God's promise to us, is God's promise. God basically gave us two things in this promise that God gives the ancestors over and over again, right? There's two things that that Abraham is given, Isaac, Jacob, right? The promise is repeated over and over again. And that promise is for one, land, and two, seed, children, seed.
Seed, yeah. Oh, sorry. I heard that as sea, like one if by land, two if by sea for a second because of how you phrase it, but seed, right. Great.
Yeah, seed. So and I read the Bible mythologically. I read the Bible as this incredible mythological literary text, and that we learn from the mythology that the ideas that are evoked. So to me, the land is a universal land. It's the land is the land that we live in reciprocal relationship with wherever we are. If that's Israel and we live in Israel, then that's that land. But the land in which we live in reciprocal relationship, to me, that's what land means. And again, and always thinking and always remembering that Eretz is not just land, it's earth, it's both. It's simultaneously particular and universalistic. And so I was definitely nervous with this title, and there have definitely been people that have made really, odd comments to me. And in fact, one of the reviews of the Haggadah, the person really didn't read it and thought I was talking about Israel. And it's, so that's one of the, these tricky language things. And I just want to say one other, but feel free to ask me to explain more. Okay. But one other thing about this, so thinking about what the title should be was a really big question for me. Because originally, they came to me, Berman House came, and they said that they were interested in an ecologically focused Haggadah. And I didn't want the title to be a green Haggadah or an environmental Haggadah or an earth-based Haggadah, because to me, this is Judaism. And I didn't want to say this was for a particular group of people. I want to reach a much bigger, wider audience. I don't need to reach people that are already super environmentally oriented. I mean, yeah, great, it's wonderful for them. But the whole point is to also reach people who are going to be turned off by environmentalist language, right? So to me, the earth is the most universal thing. It's like, and just wanting to reach the widest number of people.
So. Can we talk about? Do you want to go, Lex?
Yeah. So if that's cool,
that's fine.
I've got just to follow up on the universal.
Go ahead.
How the sausage is made, everyone. Okay. So Yeah, I'm really thrilled to hear you bringing up this constant Jewish tension of particularism and universalism, um, because I felt that in exploring your Haggadah, and what I really felt was an emphasis. I mean, this was my takeaway, on the universal side of it, and I think that for all the reasons you just said, it makes perfect sense. Land is not only a Jewish thing. I mean, I actually had a moment where I was looking. This might seem weird. There was a cool rewrite of Who Knows One that you had.
Yes, Hyester
What?
and Kaufman's. Yes.
Oh, great. So and we'll try to get a link to that in our website. But it redid a lot of, so there's the classic Passover song, Who Knows One, there's one God, and then it goes, there's 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments, there's 3 fathers. It gives you all these all these specifically Jewish numerical things, all the way up to 13. So it gives you a Jewish connection for every number.
Right.
This one was very universalist, and you could, like, honestly, I think you could show, I'm not looking at it right now, so I forget if there were some that were more specifically Jewish, but if my memory is correct, it was mostly universal. And
Right.
honestly, it would work for any group of people. They wouldn't even know it's Jewish necessarily if you didn't tell them. And I'm not saying that as a critique, I'm saying that as a celebration, because I do think that we've erred pretty hard in the Passover. We've erred on the side of particularism with Passover in many ways. And it's not that there's a problem there. I do want to dwell on the specifics of this people that left this land in the book of Exodus and how that has influenced Jewish history specifically. But like, there are so many universal elements. And I thought that Who Knows One was a beautiful distillation of that. But can you just say a little more about why this holiday being universalist in the way you just said, why celebrating land isn't just like some special niche interest of Passover, but actually something that all of us as Jews should be interested in?
Sure. So for me, I felt like my work from the very beginning is kind of a corrective to, so if you look at Judaism as the story of the Israelite people, I mean, it's the story of the beginning of a people, the psychology of this people, what the people going through this journey, but it's all focused on the way that we read is it's all focused on the people. There's a whole other natural story in the background that we miss. And we also, to me, I feel like we've privileged this idea of the God of the Israelites over the idea of the God of creation. So, and my first work, I wrote a book called The Splendor of Creation, which is a close reading of Genesis 1 from an ecological perspective. And I feel like we've really lost the sense of the God of creation. So it's not just about Passover. To me, it's the whole tradition. It's the whole tradition. We've privileged the people story, the human story, over the whole story of all of creation together. And to me, it's always felt out of balance for me. It's always felt out of balance. And the only way I could even become, like, I got into Judaism because I was looking at it from an ecological perspective. I was studying with a friend, and I noticed all of these ecological things in Genesis 1, and I was so excited about it. But then, so I've just always felt like it was really imbalanced, that there was too much focus just on the story of the people, and that there's this whole, the universal, the larger story that includes nature is there, but it's just been overlooked. So, and again, the Haggadah is a distillation of our larger story. So it's like putting that back into context, an ecological context too.
So I'm curious about the experience of being a Haggadah creator, a Haggadah writer, in the sense that I've been a kind of Haggadah skeptic in the last couple of years, where I've said that I kind of think that the whole thing has gone wrong in the sense that we're sitting around a table reading, and I said this before, reading the cookbook and not eating the cake. And my question is, I guess, first of all, am I wrong? And how should a Haggadah work at its best? And I'm curious about how you thought in reconstructing this Haggadah to say, like, well, what does it do? Like, what is the experience of sitting around the table with your Haggadah? How do you imagine in your in your dreams that it will be used, and what would happen to the people who use it?
Mm-hmm.
And how did you construct it to do that?
Right. Okay, so I just want to say to begin with that, you're supposed to, right? We're supposed to have an experience of slavery at the table, right? And I think that's what you're talking about. We read about it, but do we ever really feel it? And that's always bothered me because I never really felt that. So it just felt fake to be sitting there reading about it. So for me, there's all of these dimensions of spiritual slavery that gets talked about in this Haggadah. And I mean, I can read some of it, but one thing I just want to say is the experience that I ultimately hope people will have by the end is more of an experience of awe and wonder at the natural world. That's what freedom is the gratitude and the beauty, having that experience of like really feeling it by going through this process, having these conversations, slowing down, remembering to take it in. So that's ultimately what I would like people to feel. The slavery part in the more that you experience in the beginning, it does feel like more like a conversation, but it's also like looking at things that you do in your daily life, maybe having some insight. I guess that's how I would say, having some insight about ways that we enslave ourselves and how we are slaves to the system. What are the products that we buy that we buy because our friends buy them, that kind of thing, so it's more, I mean, if we're supposed to feel slavery and freedom, to me, the slavery part is the insight about how enslaved we actually really are.
But
Yeah.
I mean, do you,
Dan, all you.
yeah, so that's the goal. And how did you construct the Haggadah so as to provide that experience? Like, what are the things that you changed? What are the things that you tweaked? What are the things that you eliminated, added? How does one look at the Haggadah, let's call it the traditional Haggadah that we kind of know and maybe love, and how do you take that and try to make it work better or differently to provide the experience that you're trying to provide?
Okay, so first of all, I just want to say that I was trying to do something bigger in a way than just the Haggadah, because I'm like really introducing a different way of thinking and trying to make it as accessible as possible to people. So for me, a big part of this was just the whole design, the physical design of the Haggadah. Like, it's really beautiful. It's very accessible. Those, I wanted people to see it on the table and say, wow, just even, just this image of having Haggadot on their table and just feeling like excited about opening it up because it's so beautiful. And just digging into different, like on the margins, there's really sweet little tidbits and they're not too long. It's really manageable. So all of those accessibility parts were absolutely critical and probably took a year just to after the whole Haggadah was written, just the whole design part was a huge, huge endeavor. So I don't know that I exactly answered. I think I answered part of your question.
No, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just sort of wondering about like the mechanics of like, well, so for example, Lex brought up the question of the different version of Who Knows One.
Right.
That, that I think you could say, well, we think that the that we're trying to provide a more universalistic approach. So we're taking a Jewish technology, which is this counting business, and we're trying to kind of make it things that are a little bit more seem relatable. I guess I'm curious, like how you take the religious technologies or the symbolic foods, perhaps, or certain parts of it, and say, well, I I've made a little twist here, and the twist that I made is going to focus you on the ecology rather than on maybe the peoplehood that you might have been otherwise focused on.
Right. Well, shall I read a few passages? Is that
Sure.
okay? I think I'm going to start at the end because that's really obvious. The next year in Jerusalem. So I'm just going to read the context for this. We close with the ritual pronouncement next year in Jerusalem. In a word play on Jerusalem, some rabbis suggest that Yeru refers to awe, while Shalem, like Shalom, refers to wholeness and peace. We pray that Jerusalem, the spiritual center for three great traditions, experiences the peace that its name promises. We pray that all people everywhere stand in awe of the heavens and the earth and know the peace that comes from living lives of wonder. In the years to come, let us dedicate ourselves to making our cities wholesome cities, cities of peace. So that's a real shift. And just to bring up, I want to bring up Yachatz because I feel like it has particular. Well, let me do Karpas, a little bit on Karpas and a little bit on Yachatz. So, and I just want to say, in the old days for me, when I would celebrate Passover, the only thing I could relate to was Karpas because it was about spring. So, and in this Haggadah, each one of the steps has at least one full, beautiful image. And here, it's this full-blown green vitality. Karpas refers to all the green vegetables, the parsley, arugula, or other greens on the table that sprout from the soil. It symbolizes the vibrant, verdant energy of spring, of life's urge to break through the dry earth. It reminds us that the freedom to just be, to express one's inner nature, is the most essential freedom. And then there are also these sidebars that in the margins, there's questions and little nuggets. And so here's one. When eating plant foods, we're required to recite a special blessing, but no such blessing is required for meat. Why do you think this is so? And let me just, I know we're going to bring Gali in a few minutes. So let me just read this one for Yachatz, because so Yachatz is about matzah and then splitting the matzah. Matzah is the simplest of all foods, wheat and water, humble pie. It's parched, dry, and unassuming like the desert. When we consider matzah relative to bread, one of its meanings becomes clear. Bread is the puffed up version of wheat, far removed from the flour and the earth from which it comes. In the context of Passover, bread symbolizes the additives and excesses that weigh us down and enslave us. So then I have in the talk about it section, a discussion question, which says, if matzah teaches simplicity, what foods might we want to enjoy during Passover? If matzah suggests that we enslave ourselves to the excesses of our culture, what excesses or additives do we want to avoid during Passover? And just this other section, I feel like is really relevant and meaningful this year, which is when we break the matzah. The broken matzah is symbolic of our own brokenness and the brokenness of the world. Some of us have broken with the past, We may have lost a sense of history and a connection to our ancestors. Others may feel broken or detached from our earthy home. We may have lost touch with the natural world and all it gives us freely each day. And then again, there's a sidebar that says, like a discussion question, which the way I imagine we'll handle discussion questions on a remote Seder is, you can have these breakout rooms for the Zoom call. So we break them, break people out and ask questions for them to talk about with each other. So this one, are there ways today that you're feeling broken or disconnected? That could go
Yeah.
on for half an hour.
Yeah. So I really appreciate what you're saying about how this is not just about Passover, but really could be a map onto much more, a much broader point about what Judaism is, or how we could orient to the world, to the land of our world. And so I wanna address like a hypothetical viewer right now, or a hypothetical listener. So this is sort of someone crossing their arms, thinking, okay, this is all well and good. But it is flashing back to what you said at the very top about like cherry picking. Like, oh, this is cool and you're giving reasonable ideas, but is this really, like, is it really fair to say that like Judaism or the Passover story is as much about land as it is about people? Like, is that really true when we look at the text? And so, I firmly agree with you that the answer is yes. And I want to give some of my initial responses to that person, because I've met many such people. They're not just hypothetical. So one of them is, we talk all about Shabbat and how this core practice of Judaism, having a rest day, is so important. But like, what's so obvious when you dive into the text of the Torah is that people get a Shabbat.
And
So
animals
and
get a
animals get, and so, and animals, yeah, animals right there in the Ten Commandments, in one of the versions of the Ten Commandments, are invoked as getting a Shabbat, and the land gets Shabbat. So the
Mhm.
land doesn't get Shabbat every 7 days, but every 7 years the land gets a Shabbat. And it's not meant to be some big allegory. Like it's clear that the land actually gets its rest. We're and like, this isn't a stretch. It's right there. And the other thing, like some of the language that's used, orla, the idea of snipping. There's the same word for what the Bible sometimes uses with respect to circumcision, like for humans, is used for cutting trees at a certain point. There's I had another, there's all these ways in which the land is not just land. The land has vitality.
Right.
It is comparable to humans and to animals. And to say but oh, this is the other one I was thinking of. Like, just look at the 10 plagues. Just look at like how the text of Exodus makes its point that catastrophe is happening. You start off with a body of water getting destroyed and turning into blood, and then over and over again, various animals and insects, whatever, infest the land of Egypt. Eretz Mitzrayim. We just blur right past that phrasing of Eretz Mitzrayim because we hear it so much, we don't even hear the land part. But like, these are infestations of the land. It's not. It talks about the people of Egypt too, but in many ways, it's more emphasizing the catastrophe of the land. And some would say that's because part of the point is that like, the God of the Torah is sort of defeating all the gods of Egypt's land and sort of showing God's superiority, whatever. But like, whatever the reasoning, it's clear that the land is a character, or for lack of a better term, like the land is a player in this story. So that's not much of a question. It's mostly a rant, but I'm curious to hear if you would add on to that for our hypothetical listener or viewer who's not quite convinced that this is sort of the ikar, the essence, but more just sort of a side project for people that are interested in the earth.
Well, I love what you just said. And I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to read my little plague section. Is that okay? Just because it kind of takes what you're saying the next step. God could have sent an army to overthrow Pharaoh, but God called on all of creation to convey the message. the plagues perverted the entire natural order. God had created the earth and all its creatures. Now God was undoing creation in Pharaoh's corner of the world. So for me, again, it's like this, all of this, you know, when we talk about it in terms of, it gets back to language stuff again, right? When we talk about it in terms of creation, some people are more comfortable with that creation language. So certain people would respond better if we talked about it in terms of creation. Then more secular people, on the other hand, aren't going to like that language, and like land may feel better with land language. But yeah, I mean, Lex, I totally agree with everything that you said. I just some people are just are going to believe whatever they want to believe. I mean, my book on Genesis 1 goes through every verse of Genesis. So let me just give you one more example, which is if you look at the commentaries, like rabbinic commentaries on the sixth day of creation, right? When on each day of creation, not every day, but most days, each thing is called good at the end of that day, right? Everything that's created is good. It has integrity. You get to the sixth day, and what's very good? What is very good? What do you think is very good?
We're
So
muted. That's why
the
it's taking us
teaching,
a second to answer.
the teaching that I've generally been told is that the creation of humanity is very good. Tov Ma'od.
Okay, great. Thank you. Perfect. That's not what it says. If you look at the text, it is not what it says. The word kol is repeated like, I don't know, 7 or 10 times in 3 verses. So on the sixth day, right, people are created on the sixth day, animals are created, and then people are created. But when it comes to what's Tov Ma'od, it's repeated over and over, the word kol, everything all together is very good. So if you look at rabbinic commentary, right, most rabbis are, throughout the ages, we're saying it's humans, right, that were created, that's very good, but it's not what the text says. And we are so used to reading, Jews are so used to reading from a rabbinic lens that, yeah, most people are gonna think that what I'm talking about doesn't register for them. Because the rabbis, they were, like, from the beginning, they were living in exile. So all of these connections weren't necessarily important or relevant for them, in those, when a lot of rabbinic texts were being written down. But that's why my work as an ecologist is biblically focused, because there's so much there, because the people were living in Israel on a land. So I mean, I would have compassion for anyone that spoke to you about that and say, yeah, you understand why they think that way. But if they spent more time really studying the Bible, then they would see.
Dan, did you want to?
No, I was just going to say that, we are going to bring in Galia, the illustrator, and then we're going to talk with you and her for a while, and then our friends from Ithaca, and then we'll just so this more note for people watching, that we'll have a little bit more conversation with you, Ellen, alone after that. And so just in order to respect people's times when we told them to show up, now we'd love to bring in Galia, the illustrator. And here she is. We have to unmute you, Galia, I think. Or you have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Oh, am I unmuted? Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Wow, Ellen, that was fabulous. Thank you so much. Every time I hear this woman talk about the book, I get more and more and more excited, because the fact that I'm even involved in it, to me, is a miracle, kind of like the splitting of the Red Sea.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved? What's your background as an illustrator? And I'd love to hear a little bit about, first of all, the process. I mean, how do you come into a project like this? But also, kind of, what is your take? Like, where did you feel the illustrations, or how did you work with Ellen to make the illustrations a central role in this book?
Okay. Well, the way I heard it from Dina, who is the editor, right? Chief editor of this thing. When I talked to her, she sent me an email and said, "We are looking for a Jewish ecological artist." And I said, "Okay." And when I talked to her, she said, "Well, Ellen Bernstein has written this book, and we're looking for somebody to do illustrations that reflect what she has come up with, the interpretations she's come up with, the kinds of things that she thinks are important. And we want to use a lot of what you've already created because we're very taken with your ecological landscapes and some of the other things you've done. But we'd also want you to create, especially for the Haggadah, certain things that have to do specifically with the ritual as it's, as she has it outlined." So I said, "Sure, we can do that." So I started I think I signed the contracts in December and I stopped working on it. I think the last things I did for them were in June. So it was a big chunk of my life and it was very exciting to work on it. And I have to give a big shout out to my friend Kay Brown, who is an incredible, absolutely fabulous photographer and tweaker. He can do things you wouldn't believe. And he is why we had such incredibly good high resolution to work with in the Haggadah. He and his wife, who helps him, her name is Dana. And they just, and by the way, they're not Jewish, they're Southern Baptists, which is another thing I want to point out about this whole Haggadah thing for me is it's not just about us. It's about everybody. It's about the world. It's about the communities we build. It's about the people that we come into contact with in other countries who need the expertise that we have, who need the art that we have, and that we need from them. And that includes the religious traditions that Ellen goes through, the three big traditions that Jerusalem represents. And I have never felt that Jews were the promised people, the only people, the chosen people. If anything, we were chosen to be a better example than we are some days. So I'd like to call up some of the pictures if we could. Should I just go ahead and start my little slideshow here? How do we do that?
Sure.
Yes, and as you do so, for folks listening in the future, in podcast format that's just audio, go ahead and go to JudaismUnbound.com, and you can find the show notes for this episode, which include all the images that Galia is about to feature and describe.
Okay. Now, I wanted to say that the reason I got started on all this is the Promise of the Land Haggadah. But the piece that I'm pointing at, it's showing us a point, right? Is it?
Sorry, you need to press the share screen.
Share screen. Okay.
The green button at the bottom of your Zoom window.
Oh, there we go. PowerPoint.
There you go.
Okay. There. Spotify.
And then just press
screen.
share.
No, that's not it. Oh dear. Tech support.
You have to press share screen and then it should open up a bunch of a window that gives you like little icons of different things that maybe open on your desktop. And then you have to select the one that you're trying to select. And then I think press share or something.
Yeah, Galia, could I just walk you through step by step? So
wait, my tech support person is coming in.
Yeah.
Oh,
I thought you were joking. I didn't realize.
No, I'm quite serious. I'm quite serious. There we go.
We've got a spouse, it looks like.
Okay, there we go.
Great.
I got a spouse who knows way more about computers than I ever will. This is the page, the one that says Southern Shenandoahs, Virginia. This is the.
Wait, we're still not.
Sorry, we're still not seeing it, Galia.
They're not seeing it.
So can you press? So I'm going to walk you through it. Can you press
Okay.
the green share screen button in Zoom?
No, because I don't know where it is.
So are you in Zoom?
Okay.
So in Zoom, you want to press the green share screen button.
There it is. Okay.
And then you pick the window that has the images. There we go.
There we go. Yep.
We see it?
We got it.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So the left side is the piece that I did based on a photograph that I took in the Southern Shenandoahs in Virginia. And the Promise of the Land title, the cover is taken from that piece. So then you go to the next scene. Oh no, did I do this again?
Looks like if you at the very bottom there were like arrows. So if
yes, and I didn't do it. Wait a minute.
No, I see them. Yeah, press that.
Okay, but now I've got to get rid of this thing up here. Okay. The reason that I started taking all these pictures is that at a Seder, Ellen, about 7 years ago now, my goddaughter, Anna Ruth, said, I have 6 months off before I start graduate school and I'm going to hike the Appalachian Trail. Who wants to come? And my hand shot up and my spouse looked at me and said, you're out of your mind. And I said, yes, I think I am. And I certainly have been, because I've been doing this now for almost 7 years. I still have about 200 miles left to go as I finish the trail. But in the meantime, I have all these photographs, such as the one up here on the right-hand side near Atkins, Virginia, which is part of, not the Haggadah. I don't think that one made it in, did it? No, but it's one of the ones I sent, and it has a lot of other things that I've done with it. So it's hard to see it because you're all in the way. Never mind. But the Seiler Bald piece, which is the next one with the sunrise coming out on the left-hand side, that is the piece that was chosen by Berman House to become My Father Was a Wandering Aramean. Mm. And there's a wonderful piece. This passage is the beating heart of the Seder, recited as pilgrims brought the first fruits of the new year to the ancient temple. And that, I think, is very important, because what would happen if Judaism and all the other religions of the world had gone on to become giving and sharing religions rather than what we've got, with people wanting to get more and more and more and never, maybe they share a little bit, but they don't share everything they have by any means.
Galia, can you talk about the process of the art itself?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, I get off into philosophy too. I'm going to be doing some writing after this experience. These are watercolors with collage on top and a lot of different kinds of paper that's been manipulated in different ways, torn, cut, pressed, painted, dyed, re-dyed. Some of it already has fibers and so forth in it, and some I added things to. And then the whole thing has paper cut on top of it, so that the trees are all the paper cuts, but the first part of it was just the surface part was underneath, and then the papers are on top of it. And almost all of my work is done that way. Let's go to the next slide real quick. This is another one that ended up in the Haggadah. This is in Grayson Highlands, Virginia. That's the artwork from it. And you can see all the different kinds of things that I just told you about, the painting and the drawing and the paper cutting and the pasting and the collage work. And then here we have Dayenu. And I love the passage that you put in here. Feel free to add your own verses to Dayenu. What would it be enough in your life, and what can we do without? For example, if we used our shopping bags and avoided plastic, Dayenu. And there are lots, and we've actually done this with the kids in my Seders for years, putting in modern Dayenus as well as the traditional Dayenus.
So what is the process for how this picture became attached to Dayenu? Like, was it something that you had already done, or something that you did for the Dayenu, or something that you did a bunch of things and Ellen picked the one for Dayenu? How does that work?
Ellen, that's your bailiwick.
So basically, Dina, the editor at Berman House, and I went through. It was actually quite amazing. Galia's got a ton of work. And we repurposed, most of the pieces are repurposed work that Galia had already done. And then there's 4 pieces, I think, that were commissioned by Berman House. But basically, Dina and I, on our own, went through all this work of Galia's, and more or less, each one of us by ourselves picked pretty much the same things for each page. It was kind of amazing. Then we came back together to try to choose, and it was really quite easy. It was great. We were on the same page. So this piece, actually, thank you for putting this up, Galia. this was one of the very first pieces that I saw that I thought, okay, Galia's the right person. I actually looked at Galia's stuff, went on her website, read that she had hiked the Appalachian Trail, and it was like, okay, she knows what, she's got the right spirit.
Yeah.
So, and what was how did you think about which picture to attach to which part of the Haggadah? Is it just kind of gut instinct, or were you kind of looking for a certain?
Well, I mean, it was, look, this is evening, right? I mean, this page is pretty much the page that has the it has the 15 steps on it, but it's right in the beginning. Yeah, there you go. It's right in the beginning. And so just it evokes, right? We were looking for what was evocative for each page. Dalia, can you show Karpas? Do you have it right there?
Yeah, it's coming up.
It's before that.
Oh, I can't.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
All right. So it's really just this gut instinct of, oh, this will be perfect for Hallel. You know what I mean? Or this is, yeah. And when we couldn't find something that would be perfect for something, then that's when we asked Galia to create something. But one of the pieces that she created specifically for the Haggadah was the Deuteronomy, the culmination of the Deuteronomy section. So Galia, can you go back? I think you just had that. Oh, did you have that?
No, that's the Magid.
There you go. So this piece was commissioned to show like the exuberance, really. That was the idea for Galia to make an image, to create an image that reflected the exuberance of an overflowing land and the gratitude. This, if you can read this passage here, the whole world was created just so people could experience the gratitude that comes from harvesting their first fruits.
Yeah.
Think about how, if you have a garden at home, think about how exciting it is when, the first tomatoes are ripe, or the first shoots of asparagus come out of the ground, or the first blueberries are ready to be picked. There's nothing quite like that feeling. And it's pretty exciting to think about it in terms of a Seder.
Well, so I think maybe it's a good opportunity then to talk to Lauren and Tali, who are actually working on a Seder based on this Haggadah. So I think we have to, I think Lauren is here. Yeah, and Tali, we have to let in, or let's just let her in, I think.
Can we stop the screen share quick?
Sure.
It should be at the top of your screen. There should be a stop
thanks
share.
For letting me share this with you.
Yeah.
Great. So, hi. So, Lauren and Tali, we welcome. We said earlier that in the final product here, there's going to be some more introductions and stuff, but we'll keep things moving along. We introduced you at the top of the interview that, Lauren, you're the executive director of Ithaca College Hillel, and Tali, you're a student at Ithaca College. And tell us a little bit about kind of what your plans were before coronavirus with this Haggadah and what they have become.
So Tali is one of the student leaders on our board, and she and our other student board members are charged with a lot of different things in terms of guiding our Hillel. But one of the things that Tali specifically stewards for us is religious life. And as Hillels, we really follow the lead of the students and what they're interested in doing. And to my pleasant surprise, this year, the students decided that they wanted to really take ownership over Passover Seder. And so we went out into like the open market, I suppose, of Haggadah land, because our Haggadah, as students expressed multiple times, was really old. They were old, they were gross. It was definitely time to retire them. And we came across you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but we definitely did, thanks to Galia, this beautiful Haggadah. And one of the things that struck me, and the reason that it was presented to the board and the board accepted the Haggadah as what they wanted to invest in for our Hillel for probably the next 30 years, because I guess that's how long Hillels keep Haggadot, according to the things that we find in ours.
I think compared to my college experience, that was a little short.
Yeah, maybe
more like 50 years. Yeah.
I actually did find a service outline in one from over 30 years ago. So it's kind of, it's an archive in and of itself, but hopefully these, these will be ours for the next 30 something years. And the reason that our students really chose it was because of its accessibility. We were planning on doing this Seder with over 200 students, since it's on a Wednesday and our students were not going to be going home for the most part to their families this year. And so like every Hillel, we were really gearing up almost all year for Pesach on campus, and then had to pivot like everyone else very quickly to this new reality. I related to Ellen the other day that it in a lot of ways reflects the story of the Israelites themselves, what our students experienced, packing up, well, for our students, nothing, just having what they had with them on spring break, and now living with that in their homes. So we chose it for its accessibility for this large group, and we don't know, in that room of 200 people, there's Jewish people, there's not Jewish people, there's Jewish students of all different religious streams and backgrounds. And of course, like Tali's family, like they all have different family traditions. You're not going to be able to be everybody's family. But we found that it was such an accessible Seder, and it offered us a great opportunity for 200 people. Then what we found recently is that actually it's a great opportunity to use this Haggadah with 20 people over Zoom too. So we've realized that it works for all different sizes, and that just because it is an earth-based Seder, a sustainability kind of environmentally focused Seder, the Haggadah doesn't need to be read just as that. And we were using it as our first night Seder. It was not it wasn't a themed Seder by any means. It was just Seder, and it worked beautifully for that as well.
Yeah. No, and we were talking about that earlier with Ellen, that this need not be sort of pigeonholed on the side as some, alternative Haggadah for those specifically interested in Earth questions. Like, no, this can speak more broadly. Tali, I'd love to bring you in and just sort of relaying the question Dan asked before, but adding a little. I mean, I'm curious what the last few weeks have been for you as somebody involved with planning this Seder. What has been particularly challenging? And I guess on the flip side, I'm kind of curious if it feels to you like working with college students, being a college student and working with other college students, that certain elements of this might be easier for folks who are able to navigate Zoom effectively, whether there might be opportunities opening up, exciting new ideas that you're trying via a Zoom Seder that have come to pass these last few weeks. So I'm just mostly curious how these past few weeks have been for you in planning this new wild kind of Seder.
Yeah. So like Lauren said, the student board kind of took on the responsibility of planning the Seder this year. And as soon as we kind of like had this Haggadah and started looking at it after Lauren brought it in, we were all just so excited about it. And I'm like more environmentally focused, but I'm the exception, I would say, in the rest of the board. And all of us were looking at this Haggadah and had more trouble kind of figuring out what we didn't want to include, because all of the little readings and stuff are just so thought-provoking and interesting. We had our first meeting today on Zoom to kind of figure out what we wanted our Zoom Seder to look like. And again, we were kind of coming back to that problem of we're looking to have a shorter Seder because people's attention spans tend to be shorter on Zoom, and having to cut things out was really hard because we just love like all of the readings that are in this Haggadah.
Totally, I hear that. I guess one thing I'm curious about. I mean, I'm thinking as I ask the question about this, like part of me feels like the universality. I don't know, like the part of me feels like the universality of this Haggadah in particular. In like a universal modality like Zoom, we're sort of all in one place, but we're in different places as we do it. Like maybe that's something like our Earth, where we're all located on some part of ground, but it's all one planet. I don't know. Like I'm droshing out loud, and maybe it doesn't make much sense. But like I'm curious if there are ways in which a universally focused Haggadah like this, in your experience planning the Seder, kind of lends itself pretty well to a moment like this, where we're kind of hyper aware of the universe. Like this moment is a universal moment. Everybody on this planet is facing us not only shared issues, but a clear shared threat. So having a unifying force like the Earth that we are on, the land that we share, might work. I'm curious if that's been the case as you put this together.
Can I ask Tali, what has the experience? Tali's been leading remote Shabbat services for us for the last 2 weeks over Zoom. And what has that experience been like? Because I know that you've had family from all over. We've had students as far away as Buenos Aires on our calls. Does that inform this question at all for you, Tali?
Yeah, I think there's a real like joy and beauty, and I love like signing on to the services on Zoom and seeing friends who have graduated a few years ago and who we haven't seen at Hillel in a while, and people who were abroad, all being able to kind of to come together, and people like sitting there on Zoom with their families, and being able to bring people's families into a space which is normally just students, has been really cool and really beautiful. And I'm excited to see what happens when it comes to Seder, of who's going to show up and who's going to be all together in that room with us.
Ellen, I thought maybe we could go back to you just on this question about just sort of refocusing on the large purpose of the Haggadah. And I'd love to hear what you have to say. And then I'd also love to hear, also from Lauren and Tali, like about using it this year in particular. A lot of us who have been talking about Passover this year, I think, have focused on the metaphor side in terms of, hey, we're experiencing a plague, or we're all just had an exodus from our old lives, and now here we are in the wilderness, whether it's the digital wilderness or the wilderness of the future world that we don't even know what it's going to be like in a lot of ways on the other end of this. But I think that when we're talking about an ecology and when we're talking about the earth, there's an additional layer that we might be able to look at, which is, I don't necessarily want to talk about the cliche. I think it's a cliche, although we could certainly talk about it, that is there a way to look at, look at things like viruses as the earth kind of fighting back against the abuse of the earth by human beings. But I do think whether or not one buys that kind of idea, which you hear bandied about, there's another possibility that the earth may well, in a very small way, recover over the next few months. Not recover, that may be the wrong word, but we're already, I think, seeing in China that there's less smog, and all the people who said, we can't pause our industry and such because it would be devastating and maybe it wouldn't even work. Well, now I think we're going to see a little bit of whether it might work a little bit. And I think we're going to have sort of a lot of information on the other end of this about maybe the capacity of human beings to destroy the earth, and also the capacity of human beings perhaps to heal it. And so I'm wondering in particular this year, whether the coming out of your Haggadah is both weird. I'm sure it's a little hard to sell new Haggadahs and how we can even order the books and ship them. On the other hand, it's very fortuitous because it seems that potentially it's more relevant than it could possibly have been imagined a year ago. Oh, you're muted.
Okay. I think, Tali and Lauren and I were talking about this yesterday. So I was actually thinking maybe they're ready to respond to this question. And I would actually like to talk more about what I'm doing with remote Seders. If that's okay.
I'd rather that you answer that question if you're willing, because I think that's I think I think that's a question that's on people's minds, and I mean, I'd love to get your take on it as somebody who's been working on this for so long. And then you can also talk about remote Seders, absolutely, but I'd love to hear your take on the big philosophy before we wrap up.
To me, I guess I'm just going to say that an ecological perspective is, to me, that's what reality is. It's everything. Life is totally ecological, and we're all connected to each other. And we've been living blind to that. And the Haggadah, in every way, it reflects an ecological reality. And that's the reality that we're seeing right now. We just through, we're seeing how connected we are to each other. We're seeing through, like the contagion, the virus, it's like it's connecting us all. And, but that's reflecting an ecological reality that's always been there. It's just we haven't been aware of it. So I think that's, I think that the Haggadah might actually really come alive to people this year, or this Haggadah will, because of that people are seeing the connections that they have never seen before.
Right. So you want to talk about what you're doing with remote Seders?
Sure. So basically, we actually have sold a ton of Haggadot. So what happened was I had this, it's kind of uncanny, but I went to the Ohala conference this year in the Renewal Rabbi Conference in Colorado. And right when the Haggadah came out.
So did I.
Oh, cool. So right when the Haggadah came out, and I had this opportunity to do sessions teaching about the Haggadah, and there were many people there that got really excited about it. And so the idea was, and Berman House has this 50% off sale, so that the Haggadot were $5 each if you bought 50 copies or more, which, I mean, it's just amazing. So there were all these people at Ohala that got really excited about it and wanted to do, we started calling these, people that were using the Haggadah, we were calling the Seders Earth Seders. And so there's probably 3 or 4 people from Ohala that wanted to do one. And then there was Danielle Lashaw at Hillel got really excited about the Haggadah, and she bought like 500 copies for different Hillel groups that wanted it. And so just even by February, I probably had 13 groups that wanted to do Earth Seders, and they're all planning them. So an Earth Seder is basically a Seder that uses this Haggadah, right? And again, it's going, this conversation goes back to the whole thing about marketing and the language of land versus earth. So anyway, it just, okay. So we were calling them Earth Seders, and then the coronavirus hit. And meanwhile, like we probably had by March, there were about 30 different groups that wanted to use the Haggadah. And then we just switched to doing it remotely. And just because we were all working together to begin with, then I just started, group conference calls using Zoom, and, educating ourselves as to how to do this remotely and how to get the Haggadah, like, how are we going to get the Haggadah to the participants? Are we sending it to them? Anyway, Shira Dicker today, who's been working with me, like in New York City, threw a Haggadah out her window to someone that's going to be using it. You know what I mean? Like, we're doing everything possible to get Haggadot out into the world. Yeah. So we have this, so on the Promise of the Land website, there's a whole page listing all of the, right now there's 10 different places that are doing remote Earth Seders, and they're open to the public. I mean, there's a certain number of people that can come, just because it's hard to do Zoom effectively with gigantic numbers of people. So, but yeah, so we're advertising. And also, so Aleph, the Alliance for Jewish Renewal, and Hazon, and Jewish Earth Alliance, there's like 5 different organizations that are co-sponsoring the Earth Seders and helping them to get them out into the world. So yeah, so it's a big challenge. It's a big event, just like this, Jewish Live is this huge adventure. It's a big experiment, and hopefully we're hoping that people will be very generous in their responses to how difficult this is. And we're excited about it. And the whole thing about them being called Earth Seders in the beginning, the Earth Seder was referring to the word land, earth, and our relationship to that. And now it's about reaching people all over the earth.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm gonna pull a number of these threads together. Ohala and Earth, and quote Arthur Waskow, who I think in many ways just sort of he's of course one of the 20th and now 21st century sages on questions of ecology and Torah. When he was on our show and in many other locations, has talked about how this whole distinction between, on the one hand, humanity and the earth is kind of funny, because Adam in Hebrew, human being, or as he goes with, earthling, it shares a connection to Adamah, the earth. So when we connect to the earth, it's not external to us. We and it are part of one coherent whole. So thank you to all of you for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation. I couldn't agree more. This is an adventure, and we've got a nice little rubric, or a nice little historical scenario to look at for adventures called, The Wandering Through the Wilderness. This latter 4 books of the Torah that have quite a little bit of literal wilderness. And so we might as well notice our surroundings, notice the earth that we are inhabiting as we go on this crazy adventure. And you've helped us to do that. So thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Galia. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Tali, for joining us. It's been great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Really fun.
Okay, so I'm stopping the live stream. Bye, live stream.